it's really important to note that the streaming wars are a real thing. This isn't just us saying, trying to pit streaming services together. In fact, if you saw the thumbnail or if you read the headline essentially and were thinking to yourself, this is some clickbaity nonsense. This is John Negroni getting onto the old stream to sort of talk about something as inconsequential as which business will make more money. And there is some truth to that, I suppose. It does become kind of an inconsequential horse race when you frame it that way. And I'm not talking about it because I have any vested interest in one streaming service or another. That's not why I'm here. It's not why I'm talking about these two streaming services. The thing that I'm genuinely interested in, the thing that kind of keeps me up at night, metaphorically, I don't actually lose sleep over this, but I do think about it a lot. And I think about a lot when I'm watching movies. But the thing for me, specifically, is that the future of content kind of rests in the hands of these streaming services and how these companies use them. And what I mean by that is the way that we get movies and the kinds of movies and shows that we get are currently changing. The model is changing. The delivery system, the filmmaking itself, it's all affected by a lot of things that are going to happen in 2021, which is why I framed it around this headline: which of these streaming services will win 2021? And you might read that and think to yourself, neither, right? We could obviously bring in lots of other streaming services and have a bigger conversation. We could talk about other ones like the big one, Netflix, which the revenue, I think the last revenue stream that I saw for Netflix was like $120 billion or something to that effect. Their subscriber base is huge. And Disney Plus is, of course, rapidly catching up. You also have Amazon Prime Video, which has a totally different model, and we'll reference them throughout this video. And of course, all the smattering of other streaming services available. We don't have to get into all of them. But the reason I'm fixated on Disney Plus and HBO Max, mainly inspired by a Verge article I'm going to go over in a minute, which kind of highlights two high-profile releases by both of these streaming services in the last year. Those releases are Hamilton, which came out on Disney Plus in June, I think. Yeah, June or July. And Wonder Woman 1984, which just came out on HBO Max. And the reason these two releases are so important, and the reason that they represent, in my opinion, the future of the streaming model, which could have ramifications for the entire movie industry, is because they were two of the biggest streaming subscriber build-ups. I don't know how to word that, I guess, in another way, but more simply put, a lot of people signed on to these streaming services so that they could watch Hamilton and so they could watch Wonder Woman 1984. They're the two big ones. They're the two ones that generated subscriber revenue. And that's really important because the way these streaming services make money, if you're unfamiliar, is they have to scale a huge subscriber base. They have to have not only people signing up for the service, but staying on the service and paying every month. And then they have to keep growing as much as they can, first domestically, so here in North America, and then beyond internationally. Eventually, they will hit a bit of a ceiling because the market will saturate. And at that point, these services will do what Netflix has basically done at this point, what Netflix is trying to do, which is raise prices and create new pricing tiers for those prices. So for Netflix, they've created new pricing tiers that allow you to watch their content in a much higher quality. That is how they're starting to generate more revenue now that fewer people are signing up for Netflix than there used to be, because basically people know what Netflix is so much to an extent that they, getting more people to sign up isn't really where a lot of the growth is going to come from for Netflix. The problem with this model, of course, is inflation, because the more you have to raise prices, especially if it doesn't coincide with inflation, the more you're going to see a drop from people who will cancel the service, people who will opt for the less expensive tier and not generate the growth you're looking for. And yeah, just like general dissatisfaction with your service, which has long-term consequences, especially if it affects your ability to produce more shows. If Netflix can't make as much money because investors aren't pouring as much money into it, then you have this ripple effect where the quality of their shows goes down. So why is that important? It's important because in the next year, studios are going to be relying on streaming services more than ever to put out their content, and they already are to a huge extent. It was just more unexpected in 2020. And 2020 was more of a transition year out of necessity for these movies to come out. And over the course of 2020, we saw a lot of films that we did not expect to go streaming first and streaming only, or like streaming primarily in the case of Wonder Woman, which was in some theaters. We saw a year where these titles are slowly but surely getting onto the streaming platforms. And not only that, the public is getting way more normalized to this sort of thing. They're getting far more used to the idea of seeing something on a streaming service that they would have otherwise have seen in a movie theater. And 2021 is going to be huge for that, because these services have plans to get you hooked onto their service first and foremost. And that is going to have huge ramifications down the line, depending on whether or not it works out and to what extent it works out. So that's why I pitted these two streaming services side by side, because to understand their business models and to understand what kind of content they're going to be putting out moving forward, we do have to recognize what worked for them in 2020, in this transition year, like I mentioned. What was it about Hamilton that brought in subscribers? Not only Hamilton, but The Mandalorian. What was it about Wonder Woman 1984 that saw a ton of people signing up for HBO Max? And what is HBO and Warner Media's plan for keeping those subscribers engaged? So this is a slightly different topic than I normally do on this channel. This is usually stuff I talk about on Cinemaholics, but I do think it's super relevant, and I do think it's something that hopefully you're going to get a lot out of. So let's dig in. I mentioned earlier that there is a Verge article that I kind of want to jump through a little bit here. So hopefully you can see it right here. Wonder Woman 1984 and Hamilton's 3 biggest lessons for streaming. This is on TheVerge.com, and it's from Julia Alexander. Now, I will be honest, if you've watched some of my other content or listened to some of my other content, Julia Alexander is a writer who I have had huge criticisms of in the past on TheVerge.com. However, I do think this is a really good piece, so I want to give Alexander credit. This is well done stuff. I did read most of this article already, and I found myself kind of doing what I usually do, which is like thinking like, oh, this, and this, and then the article actually addresses it, which is always nice. That's what you want. So the article starts here pointing out what I've pointed out already here. These are the 2 biggest films where streaming was concerned. And we do have third-party data that shows that people were signing up to their respective services, HBO Max and Disney Plus, because solely they wanted to watch these 2 things, these 2 movies. And what this article kind of gets into is that the initial signups are not exactly congruous with people staying on the services. Now, it is important to note that for Wonder Woman 1984, it's too early to tell because it just happened and it's on the service for another 30 days from December 25th. So you do the math. Whereas Hamilton, we already know that people dropped off of Disney Plus after they watched Hamilton because it was a pop culture moment. And then after that, they felt like they didn't need to keep watching Disney Plus. So we have to talk about, okay, what is Disney's plan to address that sort of thing? And then also, what has Warner Media done in advance of Wonder Woman being off of the platform and even further incentivizing people not to have HBO Max? So we're going to dive into all of that. The article mentions a research firm called Antenna, which kind of helps confirm some of these results. So you can look into that. It says here, digging into the data shows the successes of both releases are more complicated than they look. Unlike a conventional box office release, streaming success is measured not just in how many people saw the movie, but in how many people stuck around afterward. Measuring that success is much harder, but with this lesson, 3 new rules of the streaming game are already becoming clear. Quick couple of comments on that. This is absolutely true because it is obviously easier to look at tangible results of a film's theatrical release and judge it as successful or not. I used to do a box office column for Atom tickets. For obvious reasons, that has become less than viable. So that is not a thing I do anymore. But when I was doing box office roundups every week, the thing that I noticed more than anything is that there are winners and losers. And there's a lot of data that helps you contextualize which films do well and which ones don't. You have to look at the marketing budgets. You have to look at the opening weekends, the drop-offs on the second week. You look at how long was the movie in theaters. And if you're comparing two films, you also have to be fair and look at, well, this film played in 4,400 screens over the course of like its opening 3 weeks, it started to drop down. Whereas this film was in like 800 theaters. And you from there could look at all of those factors, and you could look at the budgets and be like, this film was clearly more of a success. It may not have generated as much box office revenue, but it made way more money per theater, and its budget was low, and its marketing costs, we can surmise, were a lot lower. And it's easier to have a fuller picture then of like which films were more successful than the other. With streaming services, it's far more nebulous. The only thing we tend to have is what the companies tell us themselves, and they choose to say the rosiest things for obvious reasons. The closest thing we have are things like third-party data, which do help us understand like people who are signing up, which helps. That does help give us a picture of like, oh, a lot of people signed up so they could watch Hamilton, right? There's a lot of surveys in that favor as well. The other thing is these services electing to have algorithms that help tell us a bigger picture of what is actually working on the site more objectively. For example, Netflix has their top 10, which is super helpful for people to kind of get an idea of which things are the most popular things on the site. And we are kind of trusting Netflix in a way, in a sense, to be very reliable with this sort of thing. We don't really have a reason to doubt that anything is improper about what we're seeing in the top 10, but it's just important to recognize that it is filtered through them one way or the other, accurate or not. So that's something to consider. This is a very true thing that it's hard to tell. Like when you watch a movie and you pay the movie ticket, even if you don't finish the film, and most people do finish the film even if they don't like it, they still pay the ticket. But with the streaming service, it's far different, because when, let's say you have the first movie or the first season of a show, and you have a lot of data that tells you, oh my gosh, a lot of people watched this thing. But if they didn't complete the thing, that tells you that another movie or another season probably won't be as successful, which is why a lot of people get confused when, there's something, a big show out, and a lot of people see it's on the top 10, but then Netflix cancels it. The reason this tends to happen, there's lots of reasons that it could be forced into that. The budget can be a big thing, but also they probably have data that's telling them that people aren't that invested in it. Even though a lot of people started it, they didn't finish it. So it's harder for us to determine. It's actually pretty easy for the services themselves to determine. It's way easier for Netflix to tell what's a hit, because they are able to like kind of cloister the information and hide it from us, to be totally honest. And Netflix is able to, like, unlike seeing the revenue from a film, know why people aren't watching something. With theaters, it's ambiguous. You put it in the hands of all these movie theaters and it's hard to tell. Okay, streaming lessons. The 3 new rules of the streaming game, what are they? So this is rule number 1. Again, this is on TheVerge.com from Julie Alexander. Blockbuster releases drive immediate signups. I think this is pretty intuitive, right? I think, so what this is saying is that if you put Wonder Woman 1984, which is a major blockbuster, on your streaming service, immediately people are going to sign up. Like, yeah, we get that. It even says here, this one's kind of obvious, but the data, actually unpacks it. Wonder Woman 1984 led the pack for the most signups over a film's opening weekend on streaming services. Hamilton generated 71% as much. And this article actually like gets into something that could make sense out of this data, which if you're kind of wondering, well, why didn't Hamilton have more? And there's 2 things to consider. And again, this article does kind of get into it. First of all, way fewer people have HBO Max than Disney Plus. So for Hamilton, it actually is incredibly impressive that Hamilton saw so many signups, because a lot of people were already on Disney Plus at this point. Way more people at the time than has been on HBO Max. HBO Max has seen a huge increase because a lot of people, they just did not, frankly, have HBO Max before this point, right? So you can kind of do the logic there. With Wonder Woman 1984, which is, was geared up to be one of the biggest films of the year, but released in theaters, there was more incentive than ever for people to sign up for HBO Max. And Warner obviously went into 2020 hoping that they were going to be able to do a ton of marketing and hoping that people were going to get sucked into their service, not really through blockbusters or even like original content, because they put out tons of movies. They put out things like American Pickle, Unpregnant, and The Witches. Like, they had stuff come out on the service. A few of those were always intended to be, I think, on the service. I think American Pickle, of course, and I think The Witches, they were going to be theatrical, but you see what I'm saying, right? The point is, they have had a tough year bringing in subscribers because they thought that their library, their catalog, buying Adult Swim, things, having like all the South Park stuff on there, having a ton of the DC things, having everything HBO has to offer, they were convinced that that was going to generate a ton of subscribers, and it frankly just didn't. And there's a lot of reasons why, and reasons we don't understand why. And one of them, actually, maybe we'll kind of get into like my theory for why that is, and it does kind of inform their model going forward. And of course, yeah, Soul didn't inspire as many signups, and I think that's similar. And the article says it here, that's similar to the Hamilton thing, which is a ton of people already had Disney Plus because of The Mandalorian, and I think The Mandalorian, it has a ton of overlap with people who are probably interested in Soul, which is like pretty hardcore Disney fans, people who watch things with their families. These people probably already had Disney Plus from like being able to see Onward earlier in the year. So Soul is a tougher thing to kind of judge, I suppose. I think that like the mass audience that Soul has kind of was already here, which again, yeah, Disney Plus already has like 90 million subscribers. Not that surprising, honestly. So Alexander goes on to say, yeah, the value of biggest on streaming platforms is complicated. And it is true that like these companies don't share data from the film's performances. And one of the things that I think is kind of tricky about this, I wonder if the streaming model ends up becoming the central model for how movies get made, part of me really wonders if we're going to see some legislation or if we're going to see some pressure from stakeholders in these companies to actually do like release this information, because it's really hard for investors to have a sense of how things are going without really knowing how these things are doing. Even Netflix has to give out some information. And the information they give out, of course, is like the signups and the revenue and everything. I do wonder, though, as like this becomes a bigger and bigger industry, I wonder if Disney stakeholders aren't going to be as, I don't want to say forgiving, but kind of like forgiving, right? If Netflix gets away with this, but for how long, I don't know, because we're now moving into territory where the industry is being fueled by the streaming model at this point, and for at least another year or so. And so we have to wonder out loud, is there going to be some more external pressure on these studios, on these streaming services, I should say, and on the parent companies to be a little bit more forthcoming on the data and how these things are doing, because it does inform for the stakeholders whether or not they're worthy investments. And that could be a huge can of worms. It could be positive, it could be negative. I'm always for these companies being way more transparent, to be totally honest. But yeah, and then this even says here, like, they're not the most important figures, talking about total subscriber numbers. And I agree with that, because they aren't. Like, as we've kind of already mentioned, there's so many variables to consider. It's hard to compare the sign up revenue or like the subscriber increase for Wonder Woman to Hamilton. It's like a completely different scenario. And I don't see like a rational argument for why that should be like the sole judge for like what was the biggest streaming thing of the year. It's super weird to consider, right? That like, I think the highest grossing film domestically in 2020 was Bad Boys for Life, the sequel to Bad Boys 2. And the reason that's the highest grossing is because it came out at the beginning of the year. We really don't have a sense for what was the like highest grossing, but like what was like the most watched thing in 2020. Who knows? Like, we really don't know. You can make guesses, you can make educated guesses, but we honestly don't have any data to back up what we would consider. Maybe it was Hamilton, maybe it was Wonder Woman 1984, maybe it was neither of those things, maybe it was Tiger King. Who could tell you? I wouldn't be surprised if it was something on Netflix that is like a movie that came out 3 years ago that was super popular for a few weeks and tons of people saw it. Like, I don't know, like something that came out on Netflix randomly, or like something that hit Netflix and everybody saw it again, Contagion. Like, I honestly, like, if Contagion ended up being the most watched thing in 2020, I would not be that surprised, to be totally honest. So here's the second streaming lesson that Alexander puts in her Verge article. Blockbuster releases don't always lead to long-term subscriptions. This one's kind of obvious too. you put something on your service that you don't have to pay a ticket for, lots of people are going to sign up and cancel because it's really easy to sign up for these services and it's really easy to cancel them. The article gets into this. And how do you keep your subscribers? I'm going to impart some of my insight into this. I think, and this is the crux of this whole video, it's the main reason I wanted to do this as part of the stream this week. I think the thing that gets people subscribed is the regular spewing of content that they think other people are watching. So what I mean by that, it's the same thing that has propelled Netflix to success. The reason people keep Netflix, yes, they mostly watched things like Friends and The Office when that was available on the service. But the reason they kept it is because fear of missing out. They don't want to miss out on the next Tiger King. They don't want to miss out on the next Stranger Things, because Netflix puts out so much content that it's really easy to use your Netflix account to discover new things, which is great, by the way. They have tons of original programming and tons of things that would otherwise have not been as popular if not for Netflix. People go to the service and they may like watch regular things in rotation, like let's say Schitt's Creek. I'm watching Schitt's Creek right now, but if it came down to it and I had to pick between the services, I wouldn't keep Netflix because I want to watch Schitt's Creek again. Does that make sense? I would keep Netflix because if the next big water cooler thing comes out, the next Stranger Thing, the next Tiger, whatever it is, if that thing comes out, the next Queen's Gambit, let's talk about something that's like fully 2020. If another Queen's Gambit came out and everybody's watching about it and talking about it, I would want to see it, right? I'm somebody who, tries to see as much as I can. And so that, I'm a little bit painted in favor of like having something that is more likely to have regular content. And I think that is the key to why HBO Max has had a lot of trouble bringing on new subscribers, because people, if you have specific things that they want to watch, a lot of them are just going to be like, I'll wait till it comes to Netflix, even if it never does. Or, I don't see HBO Max, like what's new about it? What's coming? I already have like the HBO Now or HBO Go. I already have HBO on cable. So yeah, the stuff I want to watch is HBO stuff. HBO is pretty niche in that regard. What people want is the feeling like they're going to get the newest, coolest thing from their streaming service. And that is what is going to determine who wins 2021 between Disney Plus and HBO Max, which one's going to come out on top. It's why HBO Max is going to be releasing their blockbusters on their service same day they're going to be going to theaters, all 17 of those titles, because they announced this in advance. They did this because they want people to look at their service as, oh my gosh, almost all the time, new things are going to be hitting HBO Max that I want to watch or that I would consider watching in theater otherwise. And that's why Disney Plus on their investor day was like, here is a ton of stuff that we are coming out with over the next few years. They did this because they want people to look at all of those titles that are going to be hitting over the next 5 years. And they wanted people to think, I have to have Disney Plus so I can watch all that stuff, or I can watch a third of that stuff. I remember a ton of people being like, oh, I'm not that interested in this, or this, but I am interested in this, and this. The point is, if you outline or you roadmap for your streaming service like a content plan and a list of incentives to watch your service, you are going to see subscriber signups, theoretically. That is what both of these services are going to be trying. And I think the big question now is, what will people favor more? Are they going to favor the Disney Plus thing, where we're going to have, like, WandaVision is coming up in January, and then right after WandaVision ends, we're going to have Falcon and the Winter Soldier. That's kind of like their deal moving forward. They're going to be having these Star Wars shows coming right after the other. That's their model. Is that going to trump HBO Max, which has a totally different model? HBO Max is going to be at least like once a month, maybe 2 times a month. You're going to get like a big blockbuster thing hitting our service. And hey, while you're here, we have this huge catalog of very diverse content. To be clear, Disney Plus also has a huge catalog, but most of the stuff on Disney Plus is more family friendly, honestly. They have they have Star Wars, they have Marvel, but they also have a ton of animated films. The difference with HBO Max is you have way more diverse content. You have things that range from like not Harry Potter, but soon Harry Potter. But I mean, you have, Lord of the Rings, you have the DC movies, you have the animated DC shows, you have all the HBO content, you have Adult Swim, as I mentioned. You have a ton of stuff on HBO Max that most people aren't even aware is on there. So HBO Max's plan, I'll repeat, HBO Max's plan is we're going to lure people in with blockbuster releases because we know things like Wonder Woman 1984 will bring them in the door. People will get on our service because they want to see Dune, because they want to see Matrix 4, because they want to see Godzilla King Kong. We'll keep them there because then they'll see the catalog, they'll add things to the list and be like, well, gosh, I want to see this, this, and this as well. I want to see, I want to rewatch Birds of Prey, or I want to rewatch, The Sopranos or something like that. Disney Plus's plan is going to be, we are going to generate pop culture moments every single month with these shows. They're not really leaning that hard into movies necessarily. There are movies that are going to be coming to Disney Plus, but I think Disney is putting more stake into their TV shows because of the success of The Mandalorian, and because they think that the success of the MCU and how episodic those films are is going to translate to big budget, high profile TV series that can come out regularly over the course of a year, which makes sense because it's easier to keep subscribers around week to week with shows than it is with movies. With movies, it's a couple of hours of content and it's there and done. And that's kind of hard. With shows, you can actually pick up word of mouth, you can pick up buzz, you can get the internet to write articles every single week about episodes, from like recaps to Easter eggs to, do you see what I'm saying? I think that if Disney wins 2021 in terms of like which service really dominates, and I think Disney Plus is most geared to win, to be totally frank. I think that if I had to put money on it, I would bet on Disney Plus. Between Disney Plus and HBO Max, I don't know how, who knows? Netflix could probably dominate. I don't think Peacock really stands a chance. But if Disney Plus wins over HBO Max, which I think they will, that will probably validate that streaming services are really not the best vehicles for films to be big pop culture moments. That could be a good thing. That could mean that the theatrical model is going to ultimately return, because I think the studios, if this happens, could look at the theatrical model and be like, this was a better revenue generator than when we were putting things straight to streaming. That's how I'm feeling right now. I could totally change my mind, honestly, depending on how things go over the next year, because I think the studios might disagree with me. I think they might be thinking to themselves that these movies do generate a lot of attention. But the reason I'm less convinced of that right now is because when I look at the biggest things that came out in Netflix, not a lot of them are movies. I mean, certainly plenty of movies were big on Netflix, and if you look at the top 10, there's plenty of movies on there from time to time. But I think honestly what Netflix really puts their bread and butter in is shows, because I think that they are just an easier thing to churn out, honestly. I see somebody is going into the chat and agreeing, yeah, Disney Plus will for sure dominate. It's hard to think otherwise. We kind of have to look at the history of these two things, and who dominated 2020? It was Disney Plus in terms of like generating subscribers versus HBO Max. But HBO Max could bounce back. It's hard to see, and as this article gets into, these blockbuster releases having a lot of staying power. I think what we are probably going to end up seeing is a lot of people signing up for HBO Max just to watch one or two things and then canceling. And then honestly, if you look at the 17 titles, not a lot of them are that intriguing, honestly. Like, at least not to me. It could just be a me thing, and maybe there's a lot of people who do find these titles intriguing, but at this current moment, I do not see it. And I should probably say for me, I have both streaming services. I have like basically all the main streaming services because it's part of my job. And so it's hard for me to be like a full arbiter on this thing, since I'm not the normal consumer in this regard. So it says here, although Hamilton drew in the most subscribers per single title on Disney Plus in 2020, the drop-off rate was higher than average Disney Plus subscribers who signed up for the service before the movie came out. This is something I actually didn't know. I thought that like Hamilton had people really stay on, and I think the reason that came as a surprise to me was because Disney Plus has had so much momentum in this past year, and there hasn't been a lot of like press like highlighting that they've lost, or like subscriber signups have gone down. To be clear, it's not like they're losing subscribers. The rate of subscribers has just been going down, and I think that is expected. That's not a big surprise, but I think the surprise is that like people were just signing up for Hamilton, which I don't know. I guess I'm still learning, like, what is the consumer habit with streaming services? We're also learning this. What are people really going to do when these things hit these services? And I think it's not talked about enough that one of the huge problems is that there's too many. There's too many streaming services, and a lot of people don't want to miss out on anything. So I know tons of people in my life who, if they don't share a streaming service, they just sign up for something and they sign out, and then they get another streaming service for the next thing that comes out because they don't want to miss anything. And can you blame them? Disney, Warner Media, can you blame people for, like, we're strapped for cash right now. Like, the country is going through so much right now financially that people can't afford these massive faux cable packages that are now streaming service bundles. Again, I can because it's my job, and like I actually like have the means to do it, and I'm very privileged in that respect. But the vast majority of people can't, and I wish these services would be a little bit more aware of that, at least, or like, I don't know. I wish there were more bundles available or something to help. Nearly 90 million subscribers in mid-December. Disney Plus is not in trouble. So I don't want to make it sound like with the Hamilton thing that they are. This is an interesting thing from the article. Streaming's beauty is also a problem to solve. It's extremely easy for people to sign up, and it's even easier for people to cancel. 100% true. Already talked about this. While big titles bring in subscribers, it doesn't necessarily mean people are going to stay subscribed. Take Hamilton. If people are signing up specifically for the filmed version of Lin-Manuel Miranda's Broadway musical, they may not be as interested in staying for Star Wars or Marvel films and TV shows. This is one thing in the article that I think is underrated, because the general, like, I bet a lot of you watching this are going to think to yourselves, but it's Star Wars or Marvel. Like, those things are super popular. Like, why wouldn't that keep people around? And I think it's because the audience for Hamilton and the audience for something like, let's take one of the Marvel things, WandaVision, those aren't possibly the same audiences, are they? I mean, they're totally two different projects. Their shared audience are probably like the people who feel like they need to see everything, people like me, you know? But I don't know that many people who are that interested in WandaVision, whereas Hamilton was an event. Everybody felt like they had to see it. Everybody felt like they had to talk about it because it was just a big thing. And you can't force that. You can't like create that out of thin air. The Mandalorian is like that as well. Lots of people watch Mandalorian and they feel like they have to keep up with it so they don't get spoiled, right? And, you know, I think that is an important thing to note as like this next year comes, and we can pay attention to the things that are popular and then things that are not as popular. And we just have to remember that part of that is because they just don't share the same audiences. And when people are on these services, are the same people who watch WandaVision going to be that invested in Falcon and the Winter Soldier? Possibly, because they're both MCU things. And in the past, what we've noticed with the Marvel Cinematic Universe is people will watch stuff that they normally wouldn't have watched otherwise just because it's part of the MCU. Look at something like Guardians of the Galaxy, Thor Ragnarok, Doctor Strange. These are very different films, kind of, you know, tonally and genre, in terms of tone and genre, than they are from, like, you know, Iron Man and Captain America. You know, like those films, not that different. But then the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been able to take tons of risks and make something like Guardians of the Galaxy, which brought a lot of people in because it's part of the Marvel stuff, and they end up loving it. So I think that's Disney's hope. I think that they think that the MCU thing will allow them to diversify their content while still allowing people to enjoy them. I know some people might be watching that and be like, well, I'm sick of like everything being Marvel or Star Wars. I want something new and original. And I agree. Like, I want that too. And we get a lot of that thanks to things like Netflix. And Disney does put out original content. We just got Soul, which was very original. You know, no Inside Out jokes. But the problem is that that's just not what gets people subscribed. It's not as sure a thing. And we could blame the studios for that. I do sometimes. Sometimes it's because they don't have faith in these projects and they don't invest the time and resources, the money and resources to get people interested in something. Guardians of the Galaxy, for example, they put a lot of resources into getting people excited for that. The trailers were really excellent. They spent a lot on the budget of that movie. And sure enough, you know, yes, it wasn't fully original. It was an adaptation of a comic. That said, it was extremely different from the comics. They were able to create something that felt new. And they can do that again. It's just that, you know, they have stage fright a little bit. And I don't know. I do have a hard time blaming them, even though I blame them. There's not too much left in this article that I wanted to get into. We can probably get to the last lesson here. Retention depends on what else is in your catalog. And yeah, we've already covered this a bit as well. I don't know why, but yeah, that was freezing for a second. Wonder Woman 1984 is a more interesting case. It's too early to tell if people are readily canceling their HBO Max subscriptions after watching Wonder Woman 1984. Yeah, we're going to find out over the course of the next month if that's the case. But the type of plan customers are purchasing does provide some insight. While more than 80% of people who signed up for Disney Plus to watch Hamilton chose the monthly subscription offering instead of annual plans, compared to 69% of average Disney Plus subscribers who signed up in June, roughly the same number of customers signed up for HBO Max's monthly subscription as the 6-month plan. And again, I think this is why HBO Max made that announcement, because people saw the deal. They were like, oh, I can get 6 months and save a little bit of money. And I know that I'm going to be watching a ton of HBO Max stuff because I know that they're going to be releasing like blockbuster films. So that's early data to suggest that this is going to work for HBO Max to some extent. Will it be as successful for them as it is for Disney Plus and what they're doing? Probably not, but we really don't know. And I think we'll have a clearer picture of that over the next few weeks as we get more data on how subscribers are behaving as Wonder Woman is reaching the end of its 30-day exclusivity. Or I shouldn't say exclusivity because it was also in theater. You know what I mean. There are a couple of reasons this may be the case, including that Warner Media offered a cheaper pricing option for the 6-month tier ahead. Yeah. But it speaks to their wider plan. I think this all covers what we just said. So yeah, I think that it does come down to this, which Alexander points out. Warner Media provided a good reason to keep the subscription. And I do think that both of these apps have done it. They're just different good reasons. And so I'll hopefully, maybe I'll write it down or something. A year from now, I want to reevaluate this. I want to look back and say, okay, which one worked the best? And we have to look at all the variables. We have to look at all the factors because it won't be a perfect comparison. But I do want to reflect on this a year from now and see how did this work out for both streaming services. Best case scenario, it does work out for both. And because there can be more than one way to find success on a streaming service. There shouldn't be one only good way. That doesn't make sense. Like, these are very different streaming services. They're putting out very different content, and they're going to do the thing that makes the most sense for them. But I do want to analyze what worked and what didn't and why. And that's all I can really say for now. I don't have a lot of predictions I can make in that respect because we really are in uncharted territory. We have no idea like how this is going to go over with the public. We don't know, like, are people going to be going out a lot more in 2021? Let's say the pandemic in the United States in particular finally gets under control sometime this year, let's say in the spring or the summer. Are we going to see streaming service, stuff go way down because more people are going to be traveling, because people are going to be doing things that they couldn't do over the last year? Are we not going to see that because, honestly, quite frankly, a lot of people have been doing stuff anyway and traveling and doing all sorts of things in 2020 anyway. So that's the big thing I'm going to be keeping my eye on. And I have gone back and forth on whether or not movies are going to come back to theaters and how that's going to work. And yeah, I have to say that it does kind of rest on which of these streaming services has the most success. I do think that is probably the case. If Disney Plus sees their model as more successful, or if HBO Max sees a lot of success, but theatrically in addition to streaming, that could be huge. One thing I didn't mention, I don't think this article gets into, is that Wonder Woman 1984, when it came out on December 25th, it actually made a bunch of money at the box office internationally. So the same day as theaters thing actually worked out the first week. But then the second week that's gone by, they've seen a huge drop. And I think that speaks volumes because the people who would have watched it, I think, have already watched it and that had the means to see it. It's hard to judge it, but, because it is a movie that kind of got panned. A lot of people were making fun of it. A lot of people were giving it critical, low ratings. And that could be what got people to be like, well, I don't need to see this in a theater then. I can just see this on HBO Max, right? So if we find out in a few weeks that a lot of people, unsubscribe from HBO Max just because they had already seen Wonder Woman, that'll tell us something. But what we're seeing so far suggests that that's not the case, that people are like, okay, Wonder Woman 1984, maybe it was a dud and I didn't like it as much. That's fine because over the next 6 months, there's going to be a bunch of blockbusters that are going to hit the service that I'm going to be interested in. And in the meantime, it looks like there's stuff on here that I want to watch anyway. One thing that I have seen some people predict is whether or not HBO Max is going to hurt Netflix in any way. It's hard to compare HBO Max to Disney Plus as easily, and it's hard to compare Disney Plus to Netflix because they go for very different audiences in some regards. Netflix does have a lot of kids content, but that's not really, nostalgia isn't really something that powers Netflix the way it used to. Netflix is really the place where pop culture is really generating a lot of reasons for people to have the service. And I think Disney is directly competing with them on a lot of those fronts, particularly with series. Whereas HBO Max, it kind of has the same like audience as Netflix, but it's trying something a little bit different. I think one thing we will see in 2021 though is Netflix pumping out a lot of blockbusters, because they have been sort of like gaining more traction on that. Things like The Old Guard, Extraction, Six Underground, they are putting more and more money into big budget spectacle movies, and they haven't seen a ton of success with it. I think as much success as they want. Definitely not critically. There have not been a lot of like critically successful ones. Old Guard is one of the few exceptions. But they have seen success with like getting people to watch those things for sure, because people are way more willing to watch something like Extraction at home than they would have been in a theater, I would argue. So I think that does it for this article. Everything that I wanted to get into. Yeah, it's going to be a big year. I think that these services have a lot that they're fighting each other on. And I'm going to be checking in on this regularly over the next year. I'm going to be paying attention to how the streaming war kind of goes. And what I want is I don't really care who wins the streaming war. I don't care, if HBO Max makes money or Disney makes money. I don't really care beyond the extent of like what it means for the kind of content we get. What I care about is people being able to see this stuff and for it to enrich people's lives and to make them happy, for them to be able to afford these things, and for the stuff to be good. And if these businesses are able to do that, I definitely give them a kudos. But always in the back of my head, I always am wondering, like, are these things really going to be good for the world? And, and good for the world to me means a lot of things. And in this context, it means like, are they going to be putting out things that, like I said before, enrich people's lives? That like when they watch these things, is it going to be something that really like benefits their day, and it's something that's going to like bring people together? I think that's the stuff that I want personally. And that's why I do this. This is why I talk about films and movies all the time, is because I love talking about things and getting people to discover new content and things that will make them happier and steer them away from things that probably won't, but always with caveats, of course. Looks like we have a question. Will Star Wars somehow affect Disney Plus? Oh, certainly. It's tricky with Star Wars because it's not going to be until more toward the end of 2021 when we get like the bulk of the new Star Wars content. And there's a lot of question marks for me in terms of like what is the High Republic going to be is it going to be as successful? Are people going to have a bad taste in their mouths from the prequels? I think that Ahsoka, the new show for that, I think Raya and the Last Dragon, not that Star Wars, I think these like kind of like newer things are kind of surefire wins for the service. I think like, I don't know about Rangers of the New Republic. I don't know if people are going to be that into that, but I think anything that's going to be like big budget spectacle, something that like deserves to be on the big screen but can be enjoyed at home, those are probably going to be very successful. So I think Disney Plus is going to be relying on those a lot. What I am wondering is how this is going to affect their marketing, because I see a lot of promoted tweets for things, but most of the time I hear about like these new things from other people. And, a lot of it has to do with press releases. A lot of it has to do with trailers and YouTube ads. I have YouTube Premium, so like I never see trailers. I never see ads for things, and the only times I see ads are like when I watch Hulu, to be totally honest, and I don't watch that much Hulu. So I'm not the best person to ask in terms of like what is going to dominate conversation, because I'm regularly surprised by like what's coming out because I miss things all the time. But I am curious about that, and I am curious what the next year is going to be like. I think Disney's going to be focusing primarily on Marvel. I think that's kind of a given. Marvel, and there's going to be a new Pixar movie in the spring, and there's going to be, Raya and the Last Dragon, the next animated Disney animation film, and then there's going to be some downtime here and there. And I think that Disney Plus will face some trials and tribulations as they try to figure out how to get people subscribed. But I think it pales in comparison to HBO Max, which has a much bigger battle, I think, especially once the year ends. One of the reasons I've been very skeptical of them like going back to the theatrical system after 2021 is kind of what we've been talking about. How do you put the genie back in that bottle? How do you get people into your streaming service by promising them blockbuster movies the same day as theaters, and then take that away and expect people to stay on the service? If that really is their plan, to keep people on the service by doing this, then that's probably, if it's successful, that's probably going to have to stay the norm. And that's not great for the theatrical business, because if that happens, I think we'll probably see a lot of like Wonder Woman 1984 situations where people will feel like they don't have to see things in a theater. They can wait see what the reviews are, see what the word of mouth is from like regular folks, and then watch it on the surface if they're still interested. I think the only things that will get people to come out to the theater are going to be things like the big event Marvel movies that people feel like they have to see because they saw the other ones, the big Star Wars thing. They're going to see the next Harry Potter thing. They're going to see all these big IP releases. But when it comes to like independent films, when it comes to original films that are, less of a sure thing in terms of box office, we're going to see fewer and fewer of those, honestly, once theaters reopen. At least that's my prediction, and I hope I'm wrong. And I hope that something happens to mitigate my fears on that. That is definitely something I'm hoping for. But okay, that's everything I have for this week, for today's stream. I do streams almost every single day, and I love doing them. So if you have questions for me, or if you have something you want me to address in a video, a lot of the times I pick topics based on questions that people ask on the live chat. So please, do that, leave comments and everything like that. Thank you everybody who is plugged into the stream. Don't forget, if you've already liked and subscribed, thank you so much. Ring the bell because that'll let you know when I'm going to be going live and everything. That's super helpful if you want to catch me live and join in live chat. But of course, happy to have you guys join in on the video after the live stream and everything. I'm still working out kinks on a lot of things, including audio, and trying to get this whole setup working. So if you have any feedback on that, please leave it below. If you have any questions about Pixar theory, Pixar book stuff, please hit me up, and I will be sure to get to those questions since I do these streams every day, and I always have time. It looks like I have a question right before I ended, so got me right before I left, so I'll check this out. Is this Will? I think this is Will Ashton. Late coming in the stream, but I would argue to not underestimate Amazon undermining HBO Max's strategy with their original content and potentially bankrolling feature film productions from the major. This is a really good observation. Yeah, we definitely should not underestimate Amazon. They have been what's the word for it? They have had the endurance that not a lot of streaming services can have because Amazon is a business that ultimately will always have a big enough bank to keep the streaming service afloat. Thanks to Amazon Prime, they have a totally different business model to keep their subscribers. The reason people keep Amazon Prime is because they keep Prime shipping. And Prime shipping is such an integral thing to their lives that, oh yeah, I have Amazon Prime Video. So whenever I want to watch something on Amazon Prime Video, I'm going to. And unlike HBO Max, that is a very different thing. People don't feel like that is a good reason to keep the service. They don't get anything else out of it. And particularly with Disney Plus and HBO Max, they're very different in that regard. They don't have a more real world practical application of their subscription service that has people feeling like their service is essential. So good point. In terms of that. And yeah, their original content was really good in 2020. The Boys was really good. I didn't love Hunters, but I know a lot of people liked that. Upload was a really good show. Small Axe had some of the best films of the year. I mean, Amazon is still doing really well in terms of putting out really great content on a regular basis. So definitely don't underestimate them whatsoever. They are certainly a major player. Okay, that's it for me on the stream. Thank you everybody who weighed in. And yeah, I'll see you all tomorrow. End broadcast. Always takes me a second to do this.